Welcome to Stories for Wonderful Children. I'm Dan Wendelin, your host and storyteller. Years ago, I began recording the bedtime stories I told my children every night. Now, we would like to share those stories with you. I hope you enjoy my Stories for Wonderful Children. Winella had had a fun day. She had been to Candyland, and she had flown back with Joey. They had gotten back just in time for dinner. Over dinner, she had told her family about all the fun things she had done in Candyland, and her mommy and daddy had talked about the snowstorm that was coming. They said that it was going to be a big snow. Winella wondered exactly what it meant to have a big snow. In her mind, she pictured one giant, enormous snowflake falling from the sky, but she knew that that probably wasn't it. After dinner, her brother Wally said, "Look!" He was pointing out the window, where they could see the first few snowflakes falling. Because it wasn't quite bedtime yet, Winella asked her mommy and daddy, and they said that she and Wally could go outside and play in the snow if they wanted. Winella and Wally put on their snow pants and their coats and their boots, and they went outside. By the time they had all their snow clothes on and went outside, the snow was already covering the ground. It was white. They got very excited. They made snowballs, although there was still so little snow that they had to scrape together quite a bit of snow from a very wide area to get a snowball. They talked about how the next day, if there was more snow, they would roll those snowballs and make a snowman. They talked about going sledding. And they pretended that they were sledding by climbing up in the treehouse in the backyard and then sliding down its slide, which was already covered with a little bit of snow. Well, they'd done that for a few minutes, and they were quite cold and quite wet. And they decided it was time to come in. So they went in, and their mommy said, "Oh good, I'm glad you came in. It's about time to start getting ready for bed anyway." So Winella went up to her room, and she got her warmest pink and blue pajamas. She put them on and went back downstairs. Her mommy, she smelled, had made something tasty for them. Waiting at her place at the table was a big mug of steaming hot chocolate. Her mommy smiled and said, "There's nothing to warm you up after being out in the cold snow like a steaming mug of hot chocolate, is there?" And Winella said, "No," and she took a big slurp. The hot chocolate was sweet and warm in her mouth, and she could feel it going warm down into her tummy after she drank it. Then she went up to bed, and she kissed her mommy and her daddy and her brother good night, and then she read a book to herself for a little while, and she waited, and her daddy came in and told her a bedtime story, and then she turned out the light. She slept all night long, and as soon as she woke up and looked at her alarm clock and realized that it was past her usual time to get up for school, she realized that that must mean that there was no school today. There must have been a lot of snow overnight, and her mommy had turned off her alarm. Winella rushed to her window to look out. She looked out and sucked in her breath. She gasped. She was so surprised. The snow must have fallen and fallen heavily all night long. It had piled up until it was as high as the bushes in Winella's front yard, and then it had piled up until it had been up to the windows on the first story, and then it had continued to snow until it had covered the windows in the first story. And now as Winella looked out, it was still snowing just a little bit, and the snow was up to just below her window on the second story. There were feet and feet and feet of snow. Winella just stood there with her mouth open looking at it. She was quite sure she had never ever seen that much snow before. She rushed downstairs, sliding down the slide, yelling, "Mommy, Mommy, have you seen how much snow there is?" And her mommy said yes. Her mommy pointed at the windows in the kitchen, and Winella looked at them. It was so strange looking out the window and not seeing anything but just the dark white of the snow. Winella said, "I want to go outside and play, Mommy." And her mommy said, "Okay, but you gotta have breakfast first. You should have something warm in your tummy before you go outside." So she and Wally decided to have oatmeal for breakfast, and her mommy made hot oatmeal. Well, then they did two things. The first thing they did was they went down to the basement and they got their snowshoes. Snowshoes are they look like big tennis rackets, and you put them on your feet and they keep you from sinking down into the snow when you get to really deep snow that's deeper than you are. So she had those. And then, with help from their daddy, they pushed the back door of their house open just enough for Winella and Wally to step out, and then her daddy closed the door behind them. And there they were. They were standing there in the little hole made by the door, and there was snow above them, and snow in front of them, and snow to the left of them, and snow to the right of them. They looked at each other and they grinned, and they started to dig the snow with their hands. They knew they had left their snow shovels really near the back door, and so they dug over to where they thought they remembered them being. They were a little bit off because they couldn't see where they were going, but soon they had their snow shovels. Winella's snow shovel was pink, and Wally's was red. And then they really began to dig. Wally dug off to the right, and Winella dug off to the left. They were each digging a tunnel, and they said that they were going to meet around at the treehouse. So they dug, and they dug, and they dug, and they dug. And Winella was starting to get tired of digging, and she stopped for a minute, and she could hear coming almost right from in front of her the sound of Wally digging. And then a red snow shovel burst through the wall in front of her, and there he was, and their tunnels were connected. And then they had a big circular tunnel, and they tried running around and around, chasing each other. And it was so much fun to have a tunnel entirely under the snow. And then they dug their way over to the ladder of the treehouse, and they had to dig a tunnel up along the side of the tree. And then they had an idea. Instead of taking the ladder, they built a long sort of spiral tunnel that went up around the tree trunk so that they could just sort of run up their tunnel. They thought that that was a good idea, but then they discovered the snow was too slippery, and they slid back down. So then they took the ladder up the side of the tree and slid down their tunnel, and they had a big spiral snow slide. And then finally they dug all the way up to the treehouse, and the treehouse, finally they broke through the top of the snow, and they could see it. The snow had finally stopped, and the sun was out, and it was glimmering off the snow. It was so bright they had to squint. They put their snowshoes on then so they wouldn't sink through the snow, and they ran out across the top of the snow. It was so strange being as high as the second-story windows. "Look," said Wally, "there's my room window. I could just walk right into it." "Yeah," said Winella, "and I bet I could too." She said, "You know what? I better check on Joey." So she walked over to the side of the house and she shouted up, "Are you okay up there, Joey?" She could see that he had set up his tent on the roof to keep himself dry. And he said, "Yep, I'm staying warm in my tent, Winella. You having fun?" And she said, "Yeah, I'm going to make some snow angels." And she flopped back into the snow. She sunk really deep, but she didn't sink enough that it worried her. And then she moved her arms and legs back and forth until she had a big snow angel, and she popped up out of it. She looked over to see what Wally was doing. Wally had started making a really enormous ball of snow, and he was rolling it around and around the yard. It was already as big as he was high, and he was having trouble pushing it further. Winella went to help him, and finally they got it to the size where they could barely reach the top of it. "There," said Wally. "That should do." "Yeah," said Winella. "Is this the base of a snowman?" "No," said Wally. "This is the front door of my snow fort." And then they rolled more balls until they had 5 of them, and they left an empty hole on one side, and that was their snow fort. They managed to climb, helping each other climb up to the top of the wall of the snow fort, and then they ran around pretending that there were snow monsters attacking and throwing snowballs at their pretend snow monsters. Then they jumped off into the snow, and because the snow was so deep, when they jumped off, they actually sank up to their waists, and they had to sort of scramble out. And then they decided that it really was time to make a snowman, and so they rolled 3 balls big one, a medium one, and a small one. They set them on top of each other, and then Winella climbed down the ladder of the treehouse and went inside and got a carrot for the nose, and Wally found some pine cones for the eyes and some sticks for the arms. They liked that very much, but then Winella decided that really what they needed was a snow bird like Joey. And so they built a big snowball for the body, and then they sort of made wings out of long, flat snowballs. And it looked pretty good when they were done. And then by that time they were quite hungry, and so they climbed back down, and they went inside. Their mommy gave them more hot chocolate and warm macaroni and cheese with some warm broccoli cheddar soup, because, said their mommy, when you're cold outside in the snow, there's nothing better than nice, hot food.
Thanks for listening to Stories for Wonderful Children. I created today's story, but questions and witty commentary were supplied by my children. The music was created by Brandon Thompson. If you enjoy the show, please tell someone about it or leave a review on your podcast provider. Our website is storiesforwonderfulchildren.com, and you can also find us on most social media. I'm Dan Wendelin, reminding you to tell someone you love a story.